Two little boys walked into a millionaire CEO's office asking for a job. What he learned next shattered his world. It had started like any other Monday morning for Alex Howell, the CEO of one of the largest technology investment firms in the country. His schedule was packed, as usual, meetings, calls, decisions to be made. He entered his sleek glass-walled office on the top floor of Howell Industries with the confidence of a man who controlled everything around him. His assistant handed him his first coffee of the day, briefed him on a few urgent matters, and quietly left him to begin sorting through emails. The view from his office stretched across the skyline, the city humming with activity far below. He barely had time to take a sip of coffee when the door opened again, unannounced. Two small boys stood there, identical, about 6 years old, with messy chestnut brown hair, big blue eyes, and expressions that were far too serious for their age. One held a crumpled sheet of paper in his hand, and the other clutched a red backpack that looked as if it had been through a storm. Before Alex could say anything, one of them spoke in a clear, steady voice. "We need a job. It's urgent." Alex blinked, stunned, and stood from behind his desk. He walked around slowly, unsure if this was a prank or some kind of publicity stunt. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his tone softer than it usually was. The boys looked at each other, then the one with the paper stepped forward. "Our mom is in the hospital. She needs a heart operation. We heard you were the boss of everything, so we thought maybe you could help. We can work. We'll do anything." Alex's entire world paused in that moment. It wasn't just their words. It was their faces. Those eyes. The same color as his own. The same seriousness he often saw in the mirror during long nights of strategy and solitude. His voice caught for a moment before he cleared his throat. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Jake Moore," the boy said. "And this is my brother, Evan." The name hit him like a brick wall. Moore. That was Amy's last name. Amy Moore. Alex felt his hands grow cold. It couldn't be. It had been 6 years since he'd last seen her. 6 years since they had said goodbye at that tiny cafe in the rain, each too stubborn to admit they still cared. She had wanted a simpler life. He had been chasing the next billion-dollar deal. She had told him she couldn't raise a child alone while he was building an empire. But there had never been talk of a child. Never mention of twins. He crouched down in front of them, his heart racing. "Your mom. What's her name?" "Amy," Jake said. "Amy Moore." Alex sat back on his heels, feeling the floor shift beneath him. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a coincidence. These were her children. And they might be his. The boys stood quietly, watching him, unsure what to expect. For the first time in years, Alex Howell had no idea what to say. Alex didn't return to his desk. He couldn't. He stood in silence, mind spinning, unable to tear his eyes away from the two boys standing before him. Their resemblance to Amy, and unsettlingly, to himself, was too striking to dismiss. He didn't believe in fate, never had. His life was one of numbers and logic, of outcomes shaped by strategy, not chance. But this felt like a moment no business plan could account for. He motioned gently for the boys to sit on the leather sofa near the window. They walked over and sat obediently, still clutching their things, eyes darting anxiously around the sleek, unfamiliar room. Alex grabbed a bottle of water from the minibar and handed it to them. "Tell me what happened," he said softly, sitting across from them and leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Jake spoke again, clearly the more confident of the two. "Our mom got sick a few weeks ago. She couldn't breathe and got really tired, even when she just walked to the kitchen. She kept saying she was okay, but then one day she fainted. We called 911. Evan, quieter, nodded and added, they took her in an ambulance. The doctors said her heart isn't working right. She needs surgery." Jake reached into the backpack and pulled out a folder, the kind someone would be given at a hospital. Alex took it, his hands shaking slightly, and opened it. Inside were discharge papers, test results, a letter from the hospital's billing department. He flipped through quickly, stopping on a diagnosis that confirmed what the boys had said: severe valve damage, progressive. Surgery was urgent. Without it, the consequences would be fatal. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "Do you have anyone helping?" Jake shook his head. "We're staying at home. A neighbor comes to check on us. But she's old and doesn't drive." Evan whispered, "Mom didn't want to tell anyone. She said she didn't want to be a burden." Jake looked down at his shoes. "So we came here. We saw your picture in the newspaper. You helped some kids before. We thought maybe you'd help again." Alex's chest tightened. He remembered the last time he'd seen Amy. She was standing in front of him in the rain, arms folded, saying, "You're choosing work over everything. Including me. Including the future we talked about." He hadn't argued. He had let her walk away. And now he was looking into the faces of two boys who, if what he was thinking was true, were part of that future she'd spoken of. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the skyline as if the answers might be written in the glass towers beyond. There was no denying what he felt. The timelines matched. The looks. Their eyes. But part of him was still frozen by disbelief. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she kept this from him for 6 years? If these were his sons, he had missed everything: their first words, their first steps, their birthdays, their scraped knees and Christmas mornings. And yet, here they were. Brave enough to walk into a skyscraper and ask a stranger for help. He turned back around. "I'm going to take you to your mom," he said firmly. "We're going to see her together." Jake and Evan looked at each other, then at him. Jake narrowed his eyes slightly. "Why?" he asked. "Do you know her?" Alex hesitated for only a moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "I used to." He called his driver and cleared his schedule for the rest of the day. No meetings, no calls, no boardroom battles. Just this. Just them. They rode in silence to the hospital, Alex in the front seat, the boys in the back, whispering to each other. As the car pulled into the hospital's underground parking, Alex felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He wasn't just walking into a hospital. He was walking into a truth he couldn't unsee. At the reception desk, he gave Amy's name and was guided to the cardiac unit. The nurse raised her eyebrows when she saw the boys, but didn't ask questions. Alex noticed how they walked slightly behind him, unsure if they could trust him yet. But they followed. When they entered the room, Amy was asleep, pale and fragile against the stark white sheets. Tubes and monitors surrounded her. Her chest rose and fell slowly, rhythmically, but the frailty of it all made Alex's heart twist. Evan crept closer and stood by her side, whispering her name. Amy stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Jake looked up at Alex. "Are you going to help her?" he asked, voice almost challenging. Alex nodded once. "I promise." He left the room briefly and found the attending physician. Within 10 minutes, he was being briefed on her condition. Her surgery had been delayed due to lack of insurance coverage, but if arranged quickly, it could still be done in time. Alex didn't hesitate. He gave his name, his firm, and promised the financial team that cost was not a concern. She would have the best team, the best room, the fastest procedure available. Back in the room, he stood at the foot of her bed, staring at a woman he hadn't seen in years but had never really forgotten. The boys were now sitting quietly on the couch near the window, watching cartoons on mute. He couldn't stop thinking about how all of this had been happening without him. And how close he had come to never knowing it all. Then Amy opened her eyes, slowly, and saw him. Her lips parted in confusion. "Alex," she whispered. He stepped closer and said her name like it was a prayer. And just like that, the truth between them became impossible to ignore. Amy's voice was weak, barely more than a whisper, but it cut straight through Alex's chest. She blinked slowly, trying to sit up, her eyes clouded with disbelief and exhaustion. He reached out instinctively, gently placing a hand on her arm, urging her not to move too quickly. She looked at him as if she were still unsure whether he was real. The years had changed them both, but not enough to erase the familiarity. Her gaze drifted past him, toward the two small boys sitting silently near the window, and the expression on her face shifted, part pride, part fear. "I didn't think you'd ever see them," she said, her voice brittle. Alex stepped back, his mouth suddenly dry. "You didn't tell me." He wanted it to sound like a question, but it came out more like a quiet accusation. Amy closed her eyes for a moment, as if bracing herself for the conversation she had hoped to never have. "You were building your empire, Alex. We were just beginning, and I already felt like I was losing you. I found out I was pregnant after you left for that overseas expansion. I waited, but when the news kept coming in about new offices, new deals, I realized there wasn't space for us in your life anymore." He tried to argue, but she held up a hand, shaking her head gently. "I didn't want to be a burden. Or to trap you. I told myself I'd raise them, even if I had to do it alone. And I did." Alex took a deep breath, fighting the tangle of emotions clawing at his chest, guilt, anger, awe. "Amy, they're my sons." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration, a reckoning. She nodded. "Yes. Jake and Evan. They're yours. But they're also mine, and they've never lacked love." Her tone wasn't defensive, just steady, grounded in the reality she'd been living for 6 long years. He looked over at the boys again. They were quietly watching, but pretending not to listen. They were smart, clearly. Too smart for their age. They understood more than they should have. Amy followed his gaze. "I never told them about you," she said quietly. "They knew their dad wasn't around, but I didn't want them to feel abandoned. So I said you were someone from the past, someone good who had to be far away." Alex sat down at the edge of her bed, his mind spinning. "Do you know what it feels like to realize you've missed their entire lives? Their first steps, their first words, their birthdays, scraped knees, nightmares. You gave me none of it, Amy." "I gave you freedom," she said gently, not as a weapon, but as a truth she had long carried. "You didn't know, and yes, that's on me. But I did what I thought was right at the time. Maybe I was wrong, but I was terrified. I was young and alone, and I was trying to protect 3 lives at once, including yours." Silence settled between them for a long moment, heavy but not hostile. Outside the hospital window, the sun was beginning to sink lower, casting a golden hue over the sterile room. The sounds of machines and soft footsteps in the hallway made everything feel surreal. "I don't want to fight about the past," Alex finally said. "I want to know them. I want to be their father, Amy. If you'll let me." She stared at him for a long time, her face unreadable. Then she glanced again at the boys, her voice cracking a little. "They need someone. I don't know how much time I have left if this surgery doesn't happen soon." "It's already arranged," he interrupted. "You're getting the best care. Cost isn't an issue. But I'm not just doing this for them. I'm doing it because I still care. And because I want to fix what I can, however late it is." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. "Then start by spending time with them. Not just throwing money at the problem. Be present. They'll see through you if you're not." He nodded, understanding the condition in her voice. Amy didn't want a savior. She wanted a father for her children, a real one, who would earn their trust, not buy it. As he stood to go speak with the boys, she reached out and touched his hand. "If this doesn't go well," she whispered, "don't let them drift. Promise me." Alex looked her in the eyes, something unspoken passing between them. "I promise," he said quietly. And for the first time in years, the weight of those words felt sacred. Alex didn't leave the hospital that night. Something inside him wouldn't allow it. The sight of Amy in that bed, pale and frail, and the weight of the boy's eyes watching everything from the corner of the room had carved into him a sense of responsibility so deep it surprised even himself. For years, he had measured commitment by contracts and deadlines, loyalty by profit margins. But now he was face to face with something raw, something permanent, his own sons, whom he had never held, never even knew existed. And the woman he had once loved, who had kept that truth from him not out of malice but out of fear, was slipping toward the edge of something irreversible. While Amy slept, Alex stayed with Jake and Evan in the small family lounge down the hall. He ordered food for them, though they barely touched it. Instead, they curled up on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to them. Evan fell asleep with his head in Alex's lap, and Jake rested beside him, still holding that worn folder of hospital papers like it was a shield. Alex sat perfectly still, afraid to disturb the fragile peace of the moment. The boy's weight against him was foreign but comforting in a way he never expected. He found himself studying Evan's features, the curve of his cheek, the slight part in his hair, and thinking about all the years he had missed. The guilt was unbearable, but beneath it pulsed something else. A quiet, almost desperate resolve. By morning, Amy's surgery was confirmed. The cardiology team briefed him on what would happen and what the risks were. Alex nodded through it all, asking pointed questions, not because he doubted them, but because he needed to do something, anything, to feel in control. He arranged for a private nurse to monitor her post-op care and personally approved the new medical team. Money was no object. But as Amy had said, money wasn't enough. It couldn't buy back 6 years. It couldn't teach him how to be a father in a single night. While Amy was in surgery, he took the boys out for breakfast. He didn't have a plan, he just knew they needed air and warmth, and so did he. They went to a small cafe a few blocks from the hospital. Alex ordered pancakes for all 3 of them and added extra syrup just because it made them smile. Jake sat across from him, cautious but curious. Evan played with the sugar packets, stacking them like blocks. The boys asked questions, not all at once, but enough to make it clear they were trying to make sense of him. "Are you going to leave again?" Jake asked suddenly, not looking up from his plate. Alex didn't flinch. "I didn't know you existed," he said gently. "If I had, I would have done everything I could to stay." "But now you do know," Jake said, locking eyes with him. "So, what happens now?" Alex looked at both boys. "Now, I learn how to be here. If you let me." Evan finally glanced up. "Are you rich?" Alex smiled faintly. "Yes. Can we get a puppy?" He laughed, a sound that startled him with how unfamiliar it felt. "We'll see." When they returned to the hospital, Amy was out of surgery and in recovery. The doctor reported that it had gone well, better than expected. Alex sat by her side as she regained consciousness, holding her hand without saying much, just letting her know he was there. When her eyes finally opened, groggy but aware, he leaned in and told her the boys were okay, everything had gone smoothly, and she could rest now. Over the next several days, Alex juggled his corporate life from hospital corridors. His team back at Howell Industries was confused by his absence, surprised by his uncharacteristic silence, but he didn't care. He had emails piling up, meetings rescheduled, and board members frustrated, but none of it mattered. For once, his world wasn't driven by ambition. It was driven by purpose. He read to the boys at night, usually children's books he hadn't touched since his own childhood. They argued over which stories to pick and often fell asleep mid-sentence. Alex learned to untangle twin arguments, mediate over who got the last cookie, and comfort tears over bad dreams. It wasn't easy. It was awkward and clumsy, and there were moments he wanted to retreat to the life he knew. But those moments never lasted. Not when he saw how Evan's eyes lit up when he made silly voices during bedtime reading. Not when Jake finally leaned against him without hesitation. Amy began to regain strength slowly. She noticed the boys' laughter returning, their ease growing. She watched as Alex helped them with homework and talked to them about their favorite superheroes, fumbling through names but trying anyway. And she let herself hope, cautiously, reluctantly, but genuinely. One night, as Alex stood at her bedside while the boys slept down the hall, she said, "I didn't expect you to stay." He looked at her, no arrogance in his voice, only honesty. "Neither did I. But I think I needed to." Amy reached for his hand, fingers still weak but steady. "They're good boys. I tried my best." "I can see that," he said quietly. "And I want to be a part of that now. Not just for them. For you, too." It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. A second chance, shaped not by perfect timing but by real, lived moments, messy, painful, and full of grace. Alex Howell was still a powerful man, still rich, still sharp and confident. But here, in this quiet hospital room, he was simply a father trying to find his place. And for the first time in his life, that felt like the most important title he could ever hold. Amy's recovery progressed steadily over the following weeks, though her energy came back in small portions and her body remained fragile. Alex made it a point to visit the hospital every day, often with Jake and Evan in tow, carrying small comforts like fresh fruit, a new blanket, or a silly story the boys insisted on sharing. The sterile walls of her room began to soften with the warmth of hand-drawn pictures taped beside the monitors and a framed photograph Alex had found, an old image of him and Amy from when they were younger, smiling and soaked from an unexpected rainstorm, entirely unaware of the future that lay ahead of them. Amy didn't say much when she saw it, but her fingers traced the frame slowly, and she kept it by her bedside. Outside the hospital, Alex's world shifted in ways no one in his company could quite understand. He was still attending key meetings and responding to important emails, but there was a noticeable difference in his presence, less driven by urgency, more grounded in intention. His assistant, Laura, who had worked with him for nearly a decade, was the first to ask what had changed. He told her the truth, in simple terms. "I have kids," he said, his voice both shaken and proud. "And someone who needs me more than a boardroom right now." She nodded with quiet understanding and cleared 2 weeks of his calendar without another word. At the hospital, Jake and Evan began to open up more. The once guarded expressions gave way to curiosity, and eventually trust. They started asking questions about Alex's life, his job, his travels, his favorite ice cream flavor. Alex, in return, asked about their school, their favorite cartoons, and what they dreamed of doing when they grew up. Jake wanted to be an inventor. Evan was undecided but talked often about animals and outer space. Their personalities were different. Jake was more outspoken, often the one to take charge, Evan more gentle, observant, and cautious. Alex began to notice the subtleties of their bond, the quiet gestures that passed between them, the way they protected each other without speaking. One afternoon, as the boys played in the hospital garden with a nurse watching from a nearby bench, Alex sat beside Amy beneath a tree. The sun cast soft golden light over her face, and for a moment, he let himself remember what it felt like to be with her in silence, when they were younger, before the pressure of success pulled him into a world where feelings had no time to root. Amy looked healthier now, still thin and pale, but her eyes had regained a spark that had been missing when he first saw her in that hospital bed. "Do you regret it?" he asked, not looking at her, but instead watching the boys wrestle over a soccer ball with clumsy enthusiasm. "Keeping it from me?" She hesitated before answering. "Every day. And yet. I still don't know if I would have done it differently. I was scared, Alex. Scared you wouldn't come back, and scared of what that would do to them." He finally looked at her. "You were right about one thing, I wasn't ready then. Not for any of this. I thought I was doing what I had to. But I wasn't building anything. Not really. I was just running." Amy smiled, a tired, knowing smile. You don't have to explain. You're here now. That's what matters. They sat like that for a long time, not needing to speak. The boys eventually came running back, demanding juice and complaining about how soccer isn't fair when you're both goalies. Alex scooped Evan up in his arms and pulled Jake close with his free hand, and they walked inside together, a picture of something not yet whole, but already deeply real. That night, Alex took the boys back to his apartment for the first time. It was sleek and modern, with clean lines, dark furniture, and giant windows that looked out over the city. The boys gawked at the view, then promptly began turning the expensive minimalist space into a jungle of action figures, shoes, and crumbs. He didn't stop them. In fact, he found himself laughing, truly laughing, as Evan tried to ride a throw pillow like a horse and Jake built a fort under the coffee table using designer blankets. He ordered pizza and let them fall asleep on the couch in front of an animated movie. As he carried them to the guest room he had hastily outfitted with bunk beds earlier that week, he realized how easily they had filled the emptiness he hadn't even recognized until now. Later, standing in the hallway outside their door, Alex called the hospital. Amy answered groggily, but when she heard his voice, she relaxed. They're asleep, he told her. Safe. Happy. I think Evan had 6 slices of pizza. She chuckled weakly. He always eats more when he's nervous. Alex hesitated. They're amazing, Amy. You did this. You raised them into these, fearless, thoughtful kids. I don't know how. Her voice was soft. You will. You're already trying. That's more than I ever expected. When he hung up, Alex stood in the dark hallway for a long time, listening to the faint sound of breathing from the bedroom. He wasn't sure what kind of father he was yet, or what kind of man he would need to become to do this right. But for the first time in years, the future didn't look like a race to win. It looked like a home to build. One imperfect moment at a time. 2 weeks passed, and with each day, Alex began to notice how much he had changed, quietly, steadily, without grand declarations or sudden awakenings. The boys were still cautious with him at times, but they no longer hesitated to reach for his hand when crossing the street or to sit beside him during meals without waiting for permission. The routines they'd begun to form were clumsy but real, mornings of mismatched socks and rushed cereal, evenings of puzzles that never got finished and stories told in hushed voices while one or both of the boys inevitably fell asleep halfway through. It was messy, and it was loud in a way his life had never been, but Alex found himself craving that noise when it wasn't there. Amy had been discharged from the hospital and was now staying in a quiet rehabilitation center just outside the city. She needed rest, but more than that, she needed space to recover slowly and without pressure. Alex visited her almost daily, sometimes with the boys, sometimes alone. She was regaining her strength, her color returning, her voice no longer thin and strained. Every time he saw her, he saw more of the woman he remembered, and more of the woman she had become, someone stronger, quieter, and somehow even more beautiful than he'd known before. One day, as they sat together in the sunroom of the center, surrounded by potted plants and the gentle hum of silence, Amy looked at him and said, "You know, they already love you. They just don't know how to say it yet." Alex didn't answer right away. He was still learning to carry words like that carefully, afraid they might fall through his hands if he held them too tightly. "I'm not sure I deserve it," he admitted. "But I want to earn it." "They don't care about what you deserve," she replied. "They care about who stays." Her words sat with him all afternoon, echoing in his mind long after he had left. That night, as he tucked the boys into bed and listened to their sleepy chatter about something ridiculous they'd seen on television, he felt a quiet kind of pride settle in his chest. They had let him in, not because he had demanded it, but because he had finally shown up. Back at the office, things were beginning to fall into place in a new way. Alex had reorganized his schedule to accommodate afternoons off. His staff had adjusted. Investors were skeptical at first, but as quarterly results stayed strong, they stopped questioning his shift in priorities. What they didn't realize was that he had grown sharper, more focused, now that his life had meaning outside of conference calls and profit margins. Even the board began to sense that his clarity came from something far more rooted than ambition. One afternoon, while Alex was helping Jake with a math worksheet and Evan with a drawing of what appeared to be a rocket ship made of cats, the doorbell rang. It was Amy. She had walked the block from her temporary rehab housing just to see them for a few hours. Her steps were still careful, but her smile was firm. When the boys saw her, they ran to her so fast it nearly knocked her off balance. Alex caught her just in time, steadying her with both hands. Their eyes met, and there was something wordless there, an understanding, a softness, the memory of the years lost and the possibility of those still ahead. They spent that evening together like a family. Alex cooked, or tried to, and Amy sat at the kitchen counter, laughing gently as he burned the grilled cheese. The boys played in the living room, occasionally running in to steal bites of cheese that hadn't turned to charcoal. For the first time since everything had begun, the room didn't feel like a temporary place. It felt like the beginning of something permanent. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Amy stayed a little longer. They sat together in the quiet, surrounded by the soft sound of the city outside the window. Alex looked at her, unsure how to say what had been building inside him for days. "Do you think we could ever try again?" he asked. Amy didn't answer immediately. She looked around the room, at the toys scattered across the floor, the half-folded laundry, the drawings taped to the fridge. "We're already trying," she said finally. "Just not in the way we expected." Alex reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. That night, as she left and he stood at the door watching her go, he realized that this was the first time he wasn't chasing a dream or running from something. He was here, in the center of a life that had waited years to begin. And he wasn't going anywhere. The rhythm of life had begun to settle into something warm and strange and unexpectedly beautiful. Days were no longer segmented by board meetings or profit projections, but by school runs, meal prep, and short hospital check-ins that turned into long conversations. Alex had grown used to hearing laughter echo through the apartment, his once sterile penthouse now transformed into a space lived in by children, filled with blankets draped over furniture like forts, coloring books spread out across the floor, and shoes that never stayed where they belonged. For the first time in years, the chaos didn't unsettle him. It grounded him. He had come to know Jake's moods, how he grew quiet when something was bothering him, how he paced when trying to make a decision, how fiercely protective he was of his brother. And Evan's dreams, how he saw stories in everything, turning the simplest moment into a saga of pirates or astronauts or magical creatures. They were so different, yet so in sync, two halves of one heart that Alex was finally being allowed to know. Amy had continued her recovery with determined grace. She was stronger every day, walking further, staying longer, laughing more. Sometimes she came over after the boys were asleep and helped Alex sort through old photos she had kept over the years, tiny shoes, birthday hats, a Christmas morning he hadn't been there for. Each photo was both a gift and a small wound, a reminder of all he had missed and all he had now. He didn't run from the pain of it. He welcomed it. Because it reminded him how much it mattered that he was here now. One Sunday afternoon, Alex planned a surprise picnic in the park. He packed peanut butter sandwiches, though Evan only liked the crusts cut off, and slices of watermelon and a thermos of lemonade. He even brought a small kite, something he'd never actually flown in his life. The boys were thrilled. Amy met them there, walking slowly but steadily down the hill toward their picnic blanket, and when Jake saw her, he ran up the path just to hold her hand the rest of the way. They spent hours there. The kite crashed into a tree more than once, and Alex laughed until he couldn't breathe trying to untangle it. Amy sat watching them with the kind of quiet joy that only comes from seeing everything you fought for slowly stitching itself back together. Later, after the sun began to dip low and the park cleared out, Alex and Amy walked along the path while the boys ran ahead. "I keep thinking about how much time we lost," he said, watching Evan twirl around as if he were dancing with the wind. "And I keep wondering if they'll ever forgive me for not being there sooner." Amy slipped her arm through his. They already have, Alex. They don't hold grudges yet. They're too busy watching to see if you'll stay. He looked at her then, really looked at her, not as the woman who had once slipped out of his life, but as the one who had fought like hell to protect what he didn't know he'd lost. I'm staying, he said quietly. Not just for them. For all of us. She didn't answer, but her grip tightened around his arm, and that said more than words could. That night, as they put the boys to bed, Evan asked if Alex could stay in their room for a few extra minutes. He lay beside them on the carpet, staring up at the ceiling, listening to their breathing grow slower. Hey, Dad. Jake whispered in the dark. Alex swallowed hard. Yeah. Does this mean we're a real family now? Alex didn't rush his answer. He reached for Jake's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. It means we're becoming one, he said. Every day, a little more. There was silence after that. But it wasn't the kind that made you uncomfortable. It was the kind that wrapped around you like a blanket. A silence full of trust and slow, growing love. A silence that meant something had finally come home. The morning of Amy's final checkup arrived with soft sunlight pouring through the windows of Alex's apartment. It was the kind of gentle spring morning that felt like a new beginning, the air crisp, the city quiet for once. The boys were up early, buzzing with excitement, insisting on wearing their best clothes, because, in their words, today Mom comes home forever. They had made cards the night before, filled with clumsy hearts and stick figures holding hands, and Alex had helped them spell out short, sweet messages, though the boys insisted on drawing 3 suns because, as Jake explained, one for each of us, so she never gets cold. Alex watched them from the kitchen, his heart full in a way that was no longer confusing. He had learned to live in the feeling. He welcomed the ache it brought, the joy tangled with guilt, the gratitude that followed him everywhere like a shadow. The man he had been a year ago would not have recognized himself now. But this version, this tired, devoted, humbled version, had finally learned what mattered. They picked Amy up just after lunch. She looked radiant in a simple blue dress and a light scarf, her eyes bright with life. When the boys saw her coming through the doors of the rehab center, they bolted, nearly toppling her over with the force of their hugs. Alex approached more slowly, not because he hesitated, but because he was overwhelmed by the sight of it, his family, whole in a way that didn't need perfection to feel complete. At home, everything had been prepared. Amy's room had been rearranged to be more comfortable, the kitchen stocked with her favorite things, the windows cleaned so the light could pour in without obstruction. The apartment, once cold and impersonal, now breathed with life. Crayon drawings decorated the refrigerator. Tiny shoes sat by the door. A pile of children's books had taken over the coffee table. It didn't look like a CEO lived there. It looked like a family had taken root. That night, after dinner and a silly dance party in the living room led by Evan and fueled by too much dessert, the boys finally collapsed in bed, sticky and exhausted. Alex and Amy sat together on the balcony, wrapped in a shared blanket, sipping tea and watching the city lights blink like stars. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Eventually, Amy turned to him, her voice soft. You did it, you know. Alex looked at her, confused. Did what? You kept your promise. You stayed. You became the father they needed. He exhaled slowly, eyes on the skyline. I had no idea how much I needed them to. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. And me? She asked playfully. He smiled, turning toward her. Especially you. The months that followed were not perfect. There were school meltdowns, missed appointments, awkward parent-teacher conferences where Alex still felt slightly out of place. There were moments when Amy struggled with fatigue or frustration, and nights when the boys argued until they both cried. But there were also pancake mornings, birthday parties in the park, slow Sundays under blankets, and evenings when Amy would sit at the piano, an old one Alex had restored just for her, and the music would wind through the apartment like a lullaby, pulling them all closer. Alex never returned to his old way of working. He took a step back from the spotlight, appointing a new managing partner and focusing instead on smaller projects that gave him time. Time to show up at soccer games. Time to help with homework. Time to build a life that wasn't just profitable, but meaningful. Years later, when Jake and Evan were old enough to understand everything, they asked him why he hadn't come sooner. He didn't hide from the question. He told them the truth, that he had been too busy chasing things that didn't matter, and too blind to see what did. But that the moment they walked into his office with their little voices and trembling hands, everything changed. And he thanked them for that every day. And so, a life once built on silence and distance became a story of return, of mending, of choosing love again and again even when it hurt. It was not a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. And it was theirs. The ending of this story carries the kind of emotional weight that lingers long after the final words. It's not just about a man finding the family he never knew he had, it's about redemption earned through presence, not apology. What makes it powerful isn't a dramatic twist, but the slow, believable transformation of a man who once chose ambition over love, only to realize too late that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. For me, the beauty lies in how quiet the healing is. There's no grand romantic speech or fairy tale resolution, just small, consistent acts of showing up. That's real life. That's what rebuilding trust looks like, especially with children who have already learned to live without you. In the end, the story proves that second chances aren't given, they're built. And when they're built with humility, love, and time, they become stronger than what was lost.